passion for Cambridgeshire. FM, online, on DAB. This is BBC Radio Cambridgeshire.
Good afternoon. It's lovely to be here with you once again. I hope I find you in good spirits, enjoying a bit of sunshine across the county as I broadcast to you this afternoon, Lunchtime Live here on BBC Radio Cambridgeshire. I being Jeremy Salis. And as we tickle your ears this afternoon over the airwaves, we'll be asking the question, are you related to a 200-year-old rioter? Somebody's just tweeted in to say, yes, I am actually. I think they may be related to, I was going to say Harley Davidson, but maybe not. We'll find out. But if you are related to somebody who was in a famous riot locally 200 years ago, something big is happening this week and we need your help for it. Time now to introduce our first hour feature guests, and I'm very happy to say that joining me in the studio this afternoon is Jennifer Stevens and Deb Curtis from the Field Theatre Group based in Littleport. Good afternoon to you ladies. Lovely to have you on the show.
Good afternoon.
It doesn't look cold outside, is it? A bit chilly. You're both wearing scarves indoors.
It's pretty chilly. The wind's pretty cold today.
Colder in Littleport, but at least 2 more degrees, I should think.
Definitely.
That wind blowing off the fens.
Yeah, it's a place I know very well. I used to get to Littleport actually every week with my dad to collect the newspapers and go to the bank. And I'd pop into the co-op, I think it was at the time, and get my penny sweets.
Your penny sweets.
Yeah,
There we are.
So very fond memories of Littleport. Well, first of all, who exactly are the Field Theatre Group? So who are you?
The Field Theatre Group is a not-for-profit community arts and heritage organisation formed in Littleport, but our work has expanded out throughout Fenland now. We've been going for 10 years, and we aim to bring all sorts of projects and events to residents, free to participate in, and real community engagement is what we're primarily for.
And is it about sort of protecting that heritage, then finding out and researching the stories and sort of keeping them for posterity? Is that part of the idea?
It is. We've run several projects. Our most recent one was called The Horseman's Word. So that was researching into the usage of heavy horses in the fens, 1850 to 1950. That led to a documentary film and a lot of original research and things, and recording, talking to old horsekeepers, recording their memories, recording their oral histories. So yes, it's partly that, but it's also partly entertainment. It's a bit of both.
I mean, that in itself is fascinating because my dad on the farm remembers horses, before tractors, of course, and no end all over the fens.
Yeah, many people do. I mean, tractors sort of came in 1950s, 1960s, so it is within living memory. So it was great.
So what are you up to let's get into it. What are you up to this Saturday exactly?
Jeremy, this Saturday sees the start of a season of events in Littleport to commemorate the 200th anniversary of the Littleport and Ely riots. And we're kicking off at the Adams Heritage Centre in Main Street, Littleport, with a series of community history workshops, which are free. They're available to everyone who wants to participate. And we are aiming to uncover yet more fascinating information and facts about those who were involved at the time.
And so what you're after then are descendants of people who were involved or convicted rioters of the Littleport rioters? Who exactly?
We are, and we're interested to hear, because Littleport is quite unique, or certainly the fens are quite unique insofar as people haven't moved much away from the area, so there are a lot of the direct descendants still in the village. So we'd love to hear from them, but we'd also love to hear from anybody who's interested. You don't have to be a descendant, you could be a newcomer to the village, anybody who wants to take part really. And not only the rioters, perhaps people who were affected, the shopkeeper or the vicar or whoever.
Well, we'll talk more about the riots and the history, and you can tell us the story. But so I imagine there'll be quite a few people. As you mentioned, the families are still there. Word will have been passed down through the generations. Oh, did you know that, your great uncle was involved in the riots? So some people will have an inkling that they're in some way related to this big local historic event. But is there any way that you can help? I mean, do you have sort of a list of surnames, or have you done the sort of research to help people to find out exactly if they are related?
We have a list of surnames. We have a list of people that were actually on trial for the riots. We have a list of names of people who were involved, the shopkeepers, so on and so forth. But we're also hoping to do some original research into family trees. So people who might like to come along and do that would be most welcome.
And so the idea this Saturday is that you're going to get all of these descendants and take a photo. Is that right?
Yes, yeah. The first session is anyone who's welcome to that. You know, I want to stress you don't have to be a descendant, but part of the thing we're going to be doing on Saturday, we are doing a guided walk around key sites and the Riot Trail, or the Rioters' route through Littleport, and we have a local history expert who will be explaining and showing people where certain events unfolded. And also as part of that, we're hoping to take a commemorative photograph of all the living descendants that we can get together on that day, purely as an interesting thing to do, and it'll be a nice commemorative picture that we'll be taking.
Is there still a plaque there? Because I remember going in to buy my penny sweets. There was a plaque on the side of the shop as well, which said that the Littleport Rioters gathered here.
That's right, there is.
It's still there, is it?
Yeah, there is a marked trail that you can follow yourself, but we're going out on Saturday in a group, and we'll all be learning together.
Yeah, well, let's hope the weather's kind to you. And why exactly are you doing this? I mean, the date is significant for a start,
The date of the 22nd of May, 1816 is very significant. It's 200 years. And it was a big event for Littleport, really. So we felt it's something that deserves commemorating and researching.
Yeah, is it because I often find myself in my head before I say things, which is a good job doing this position profession. I wasn't sure, is it a celebration or is it a commemoration?
I don't think we could really call it a celebration. I think I'd prefer the word commemoration. Would you agree, Deb?
I would. The Littleport Riot is commonly held really to be probably the most significant historical event in Littleport. It's always very, very interesting uncovering that community's history, your own history. This is grassroots history. But we're not intending to celebrate it, but certainly to mark it and to uncover it and to discover new things about it if we can.
Because it seems weird to sort of celebrate sort of an unruly breakout, but then there's a sort of element of local people sort of standing up for their rights, isn't there? Which I can imagine some descendants thinking, actually, do you know what? Good on them. They stood up for what they believed and didn't just sort of kowtow to the landed gentry.
That's absolutely right.
Certainly didn't. Quite interestingly, we've just been putting up a window display in Adams Heritage Centre. Kind of local people have been coming by and saying, I would riot today. I would join them today. So the feeling is still there.
Yeah, well, let's not use this show as a catalyst. Well, stay with us, Jennifer and Deb. We'll talk more about the history of the Littleport Riots and how you can become involved as well. All here on Lunchtime Live with me, Jeremy Salis. I'm talking about not the celebrations we discussed, it's the commemorations, the marking of the 200 years since the Littleport Riots. Now, it was, it was a big deal in Littleport, wasn't it? It's probably the biggest thing that's ever happened in Littleport, and it had quite large repercussions nationally as well. So just fill us in, for those people maybe new to the area who don't know what happened with the Littleport Riots, take us back 200 years. What happened?
Well, I think probably the first thing to say was that at the time things were pretty desperate for most agricultural labourers. Wages were very low. Say on average 10 shillings a week, 7 shillings of which you'd need to buy the flour to make the bread to feed your family. The Napoleonic Wars hadn't helped. Grain prices were hugely inflated. I have to say, not helped by the farmers and the millers, who artificially kept prices high by hoarding. Wouldn't you agree,
Absolutely, in the introduction of the Corn Law as well, which is a whole separate subject, combined really to produce a perfect storm. And people, agricultural labourers in particular, people were actually starving. And I always equate it really in terms of being the equivalent of the Irish potato famine.
Really?
There was real famine and absolute destitution and desperation, particularly in rural areas. So the lid was on the pot already and it was boiling.
So you've got these desperately poor labourers, just trying to make ends meet to feed their families, and then you've got the sort of wealthy farmers, have you?
It
who
was,
were
it really
expecting
was.
them to
It
do
was
the
the
work.
haves,
Yes.
the haves and the have-nots.
Yes.
And I think the Napoleonic Wars hadn't helped. They were desperately trying to raise taxes to pay for the astronomical cost of the war. So it was not only grain, it was not only flour, but taxes went on to beer, candles,
Quite, yes.
salt and sugar, kind of real basic stuffs really of
As
life.
often happens that it's the poorest families who really bore the brunt of the country's virtual bankruptcy.
So what happened? What was the sort of catalyst for action?
In Littleport, a group of labourers met one night in the George and Dragon Inn.
So it was the Globe, wasn't it, to start with?
One
Down
of
the
the
pub,
two
yeah, right,
pubs,
yeah.
anyway. And they were members of a benefit club, and you would pay in your pennies and halfpennies when you were in work. And then when you were desperate or you needed money or out of work, you would draw it out. They met to decide who would be most in need of relief funds for that year. And in the course of that meeting, they discovered that virtually everyone was destitute. Virtually everyone was in dire straits. Seated as they were in a pub, I think a few more pints of ale slipped down, and a sort of general grievance began to emerge. And rather fuelled by this, they went in search of the local landowner, Henry Martin, who was particularly hated, really, in the community. Quite what their intention was, it's hard to say, but mixture of, grievance and alcohol is never a good one. And on the way, they managed to collect some other people from the village who'd come out to see what they were about. And that at some stage, this group of people underwent fairly terrifying transformation and became a mob. And once that happened, groups of looters broke away from the main body of the people who were still searching for Henry Martin. Defenceless householders were attacked, property was destroyed, goods were looted, and a pretty lively night was had all round.
So it got pretty nasty, and then the army had to be called in. Is that right?
They marched on Littleport they marched on Ely, the next day. They collected a rabble in Ely, and things escalated from there. And there was mass looting. People were attacked. There were robberies. It was a full-blown civil disturbance.
Yeah, houses were smashed, furniture was thrown out of windows, peculiar things were stolen. 14 shirts belonging to Henry Martin. I mean, peculiar things. How anybody could own 14 shirts then would show his
what
wealth.
happens when you start looting.
Yeah, you just take whatever you can.
It is, as we mentioned before, it is this interesting element of it. It turned a bit nasty and things got out of hand, but then the other element of people actually standing up and fighting,
I think people were feeling desperate.
Back. Yeah.
I think they couldn't see an end to it, really. They just couldn't see an end to their misery, and it was a really, really tough life then. A really tough life.
Now, I was always told that Little Salis was in some way involved in this, and that is all I've ever had a name.
Oh, well, he was.
And I always think of him being like Little John, so like some hulk of a man.
Well, he may well have been a hulk of a man, I don't know.
Yes, but you've done some research.
Yes, I have. He was certainly known as Little Salis, that was his name. He wasn't a rioter. He was actually a labourer, and he worked for Henry Martin. And he was actually called in because he witnessed the attack on the house. Henry Martin was lodging with his grandmother, Rebecca Wadlow, at the time, and he witnessed the attack. So he was actually called to the trial to give evidence against the rioters.
Oh, right. So he was part of the prosecution case against...
He was part of the prosecution case, yes.
So how do I feel about that?
I'm not too sure.
Yeah. Sounds a bit like a snitch.
Well, there's no doubt that the rioters did commit the crimes for which they were indicted. It is hard in some ways to maintain your sympathy with a group of people once they become a rampaging mob. So there are mixed feelings. And certainly they did pay the price for their 2 days.
And the sentences were extremely harsh.
Well, what happened?
Extremely harsh.
Death penalty, Central Australia? What happened to them?
5, actually, in the end, had the death penalty. So many were sent to
There were 80
Australia.
convicted rioters. 21 were sentenced to death initially, but in the end only 5 were hanged. The others were imprisoned or transported to Van Diemen's Land, which I think we now know is New Zealand, maybe certainly to a penal colony.
And
Many of whom settled there and didn't actually return. And once their sentences had been served, they did rather well for themselves out there. So there are some turnarounds.
Yeah. Okay. So okay. All right. He was standing on the right side of the law then, little Salis.
He was.
Okay.
He was.
Quite upstanding citizen.
It was probably the other side of the family anyway. So thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for doing that research. That's more than I've ever known before, so I appreciate that. Jennifer Stevens and Deb Curtis from the Field Theatre Group based in Littleport. There's lots of things happening, we should say, with the marking of the 200-year anniversary of Littleport Riots, and plenty out there. Do find out more. But a good port of call for people to find out what is happening, and particularly this weekend on Saturday. Where should people head?
If you're able to visit the Facebook page, which has been created, which is called Littleport Riot 200, that's probably your best port of call, actually.
Because that lists all of the events.
All of the events. It's not just the Field Theatre Group. Many organisations in Littleport are very busy this year to commemorate this date.
Great stuff, Deb. Jennifer, thank you so much.
Okay,
All the
thank
best.
you.
Enjoy this weekend.